Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Classroom to Corner Office Career Talks with Chris, a podcast to help you navigate the wild world of work, whether you are a new professional or fresh grad entering the workforce, or somebody that's been there for a while and maybe considering a new path in your career journey. Today, I'm joined by Patrick, a physical therapist serving his local community in the local area in which he lives. So I think this is the first time anybody will hear somebody from kind of this healthcare or healthcare adjacent profession area. So definitely a fresh perspective from somebody in the workforce. So Patrick, appreciate you joining us today and giving us some of your thoughts and wisdom related to work.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. I think it's wonderful what you're putting out there. I'm glad to be part of it. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, appreciate it. So we'll just dive right into it. So physical therapy, entering that world, right? That's a decision, all right? That's a big decision to make as far as your education, your preparation, and then, kind of that pre-professional path. So I want you to talk a little bit about how you arrived maybe at that career choice or that decision to take your education to that level and then serve in this way.
Sure. Great questions. In order to become a physical therapist, it does require you to have an undergraduate degree, and then naturally you apply to go postgraduately to physical therapy school. I think they're trying to, you know, now I think the requirements are a little bit different than again this 15, 16 years ago when I was going through the process uh, of how to get in and what they're looking for, and all that sort of stuff, requirements to get accepted. Um, basically my path early on after high school, I was fortunate enough to be able to get offered a scholarship to swim. And so that led me to go to Wheeling Jesuit. And at the time, Wheeling Jesuit, where we went. And really, I won't lie. At 18 years old, I didn't know, what I wanted to do. I just know I needed to do something. Felt that I wanted to pick something in the sciences. Basic sciences was something I thought would be a good opportunity. So I ended up getting my bachelor's in chemistry. And then along the way, I had a professor who's very monumental for me. So I fell in love with political science as well. So I double majored in chemistry and political science. Felt that both of those might be able to unlock maybe potentially law school, maybe potentially something medical. Fall back on engineering. I thought there was a lot of diversity with what you could do with those degrees, because at the time the university did not have like a pre-PT program. We didn't have like a pre-athletic training program, which are now becoming more common. So really, you kind of had to use some of those science type things, psychologies, chemistries, biologies, physics, to kind of get into those postgraduate programs. So chemistry was that for me. After finishing, and completing those, just wasn't quite sure still, where we were going. Had the opportunity to do some stuff in North Carolina. Kind of learned when I was there, kind of hands on, that wasn't really me. Wasn't really what I was looking for with utilization again of chemistry and stuff like that. Specifically to like lab work. I'm not the type to just, it's not me. Like I need to be out talking with some folks and being ingrained and meeting and greeting some people. So that real world experience was valuable, because it kind of led me to know that that wasn't me. So as I kind of sat back, I did take, I'll call it a year. We were 9 months off, kind of 10 months off. Did a lot of self reflection. Did a lot of just kind of, you know who in my life has been important. Why are they important? And kind of all fell back to some childhood stuff. When I was being an athlete, I was frequently injured, frequently in PT clinics, frequently getting treatment. And there's an individual that I grew up with that his dad was our local physical therapist, and he was just monumental in our community, monumental for me in life. Was just a fantastic professional role model. I said, how cool is that to be able to work, but then use your work to create programs that better everybody? So he created local Challenger League programs that we were all involved with. Children with disability playing baseball. That we all got to volunteer and help with. Immense amount of stuff that he did. And when I reflected on that, I said, man, I would really feel like there's a lot of great value for me what I'm looking for and being able to do something like that. So I'm a pretty faithful person and pretty spiritual person. He says, I'm just going to apply to one school. if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. So when I took the what do they call that? I can't remember. I took the test for grad school and did my application, and I was accepted. And then here we are. And I was able to be accepted where I went to undergraduate at, so the familiarity and so forth was already there. And yeah, so that's what kind of led me to be where I'm at today.
Yeah, and we got the DPT title, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So where I went, Wheeling at the time was the first in the state of West Virginia to have their doctoral program offering. It was really attractive to me early on. A lot of therapists, if you go decades ago, was just a bachelor's program. And then I don't know the years. I wish I did for you, but some period of time at that time they upgraded to a master's program, and then they made a big movement. Our National Board of Physical Therapy made a movement that they wanted all universities to change to a doctoral level degree. I think it was by 20, something like 2020. They wanted to have all that conversion done. So that's why if you go and if you do seek treatment through therapists, you might still see some that are PT, some that are MPT, and then some that are DPT, dependent upon. And naturally, they didn't require folks that were a bachelor's to go back and get their doctorate for them to practice. It's kind of, hey, you've been practicing for 15 years, you know what you're doing. They didn't make that change. But any new graduate, any new institution is going to have that doctoral level degree now. That's correct.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about kind of this reflection period, not just as you were considering the career, but there's also some self-awareness going into college, right?
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not sure exactly what direction I want to go. I want to provide myself options, right? Looking at political science, looking at, maybe pre-law, getting some of that science background. Those are, we'll say, pairs or tandems of programs that you don't see a lot of people explore at the same time. So for you, how difficult was that navigating? Because really that's using some different parts of your mind and your brain, and probably the coursework didn't align at times. So how did you find yourself navigating, we'll just say, the academic piece to provide and prepare yourself for whatever the next step would be?
Yeah, great question. So it was not easy. It's not something that I would recommend doing a lot. I was very motivated from an economics cost perspective that I did not want to be in school for 5 years. I needed to get this done in four because I didn't know how else I'd be able to stay, because certain scholarships are 4 years, man. So, it's like, okay, I need to get this done. So yeah, so chemistry in and of itself is an animal. It's got some very, or at least for me, I'm sure there's some folks that it's a breeze, but on my end, there's several courses that come to mind that it's like, okay, we're going to have to really bust this down to get this, to accomplish this. And I think that was the beauty then of political science, was it was just so starkly different that it was refreshing to just look at something else. It was refreshing to, with chemistry being so analytical, so numbers, so cut and dry in a lot of ways. I love the avenue of political science because there's a lot of philosophy in it, a lot of psychology in it, a lot of opportunity to, you could skew, and it was okay to skew as long as you had a justification for that. And then, like I said, the professor I alluded to earlier was a political science. When we were going through our first 2 years, you either had to take psychology or you had to take political science, or you had to do something to integrate some of those other classes. And I just fell into her lap, and she just opened my eyes in a lot of ways, on how to view certain things, that really aligned with how I viewed things. So I just wanted to stick with her. And then it just all of a sudden we were sitting one day and she's like, you basically have this minor done. Why don't you just do these 3 extra classes or 4 extra classes and just do the major? And I was like, oh boy. I said, okay, and we did it. And then managing that was swimming was definitely interesting. I was thankful to have swimming because there were certain requirements of maintaining a GPA. There were certain requirements of I had to show up at study hall, certain requirements of, I don't think if those were offered, I'm not quite sure how easy that would have been for me to stay disciplined. But yeah, that did that. And really, I think what was really the most challenging part of that is, call it a capstone, call it a whatever you want to, each degree had their own end of, you had to have this big accumulation of your end of your 4 years project. And I said, how in the world am I going to create in the same semester one for chemistry and one for political science? The beautiful part, I don't even know if you knew this, was when I met with both heads of poli sci and chem, they allowed me to combine them together, and I was actually able to combine them together. So I presented them both to them. And it was pretty cool because essentially, and I won't get on a huge tangent about it, but I was able to pull in things related to refugee camps and the conditions of things like soil level, water levels, and so forth, and how different chemical interactions integrated that and what it meant for their well being. So it was actually really cool to see how you could draw some of that stuff from both your knowledge bases. So we got through it. Yeah.
Yeah, and created in really, in essence, an interdisciplinary capstone project, right? That
Correct.
was
Correct.
supported by, and that's, I mean, that's a really cool experience. And I think it speaks to having those open and honest conversations with people around you of like, hey, this is going to be a challenge. Is there a way that we can work together for the betterment of all of us, right? For the
Absolutely.
academic programs as well as me. So I think that speaks not only to the people, but also to you being willing to explore that academically and as well towards the end of your academic career. And through all of that, right, being a collegiate student athlete at the D2 level, while also, being involved in theater productions and other, campus clubs and organizations,
For
right?
sure.
It's how we lived our lives, right?
We did, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, it wa and in a lot of ways, man, the rigors of PT school, which are not easy, I really feel that prepared me really well to be able to accomplish that, that's for sure.
Yeah, so we get the DPT, and then we arrive in the workforce. Right now, we've talked about. So I know from our discussion, you talked about how private practice. Now you're in home health with some hospice intertwined with that as well. How has navigating, we'll say, the first five-ish years of your professional life, how did that come to be? And then what were some of the key insights that you learned in that early part of your career?
Sure. Yes, I think if you took a poll of physical therapists, I would say in most circumstances, they were involved in athletics in some capacity, rather childhood, middle school, high school, some collegiately. But there's got to be majority of the time there's an athletic integration early on, and because of that, then they probably themselves had sustained injuries or sustained things where maybe they visited, their local physical therapist or things to try to recoup, recover, and get back on the field or get back in the pool or get back wherever it is. So that's a very familiar thing. And in a lot of ways, even when I was entering physical therapy, I knew that other avenues existed, but my only familiarity was really the outpatient world. So I think most people, when they're going through physical therapy school, have a desire to do outpatient. We want to work with athletes, want to get them back on the field, and we want to get them back doing their thing, right? So that's what I did. So I was able to get on with a wonderful company that had several outpatient clinics offered throughout our north central West Virginia area. And when I came on, I came on, they kind of have like a training program where they cut you fully loose. But after you kind of get through that kind of directly supervised kind of tenure, they offered the opportunity for me to become a clinic director here in close to my hometown. So went right with it. Said absolutely. I said let's do this. So I did that for about the first 5 years of my life of my career. I was able to be the clinic director of that outpatient institution, and again, really focused kind of on the athlete, you know, that we kind of talked about earlier, but then quickly realized there's a whole lot more type of people that come into an outpatient clinic than just an athlete. So yeah, so I definitely gained a lot of insights on that outpatient perspective on what that was like.
Yeah, and then how did that experience kind of move you into the next phase of your career, right? Because that you didn't stay in that outpatient world, so you're in a different world now. So how did that experience influence some decisions to work into what you do now in more of a home health environment?
Sure. So several things went into that, both professionally and personally. The easiest answer for me to give you is personal perspective. During that time, got married, blessed to have our first child. And whenever you're a clinic director, or at least in my experience of being a clinic director, there's a lot more behind the scenes stuff than just patient care. So you're dealing with administrative things, you're dealing with audits, you're dealing with insurance authorization requests, denials, resubmitting those requests, because a lot of small clinics don't have the staffing of people that do that for you. So then, therefore, that falls on you to do that. So, on top of seeing your expected patient caseload, you also then have to navigate all that stuff. And that was rather weekends, evenings, mornings, whatever. And I just kind of told my wife there's a lot of times where um, I'd leave for work, my daughter was asleep, and I'd come home and my daughter was asleep. And I said, this isn't quality. This is what I'm looking for right now. So that really was the thing that kind of tipped the scale for me to look other directions. Was the personal part. The thing that kind of got to me professionally at that time was several things that stand out. One, again, if you look at clientele, it was refreshing when you got the athletes, the type of person, because the athletes typically motivated, and they want to get better. They do the things, or they active and engaging in the things that you're trying to teach them to get them to do. The ones that I really was not a big fan of at that time, which started to become more prevalent, was groups such as like workers' compensation. Because what I found a lot of times with workers' compensation is people don't want to get back to work as quickly as they want to get back to playing football. So therefore, I felt there was a lot of, and I can't say this for everybody, but there was a lot of limited motivation, maybe not doing everything you wanted them to do. And it was frustrating because they could get better, but they weren't getting better. And then you kind of feel defeated. And that defeated feeling is no fun because you want people to get better. I think most therapists have a lot of empathy and they have a lot of understanding and they truly want you to do better for yourself. And then it's frustrating when you can't get them to see that for themselves. So that was difficult. And then another difficult thing for me was working in the area that you live, because you obviously run into people at the grocery store, you run into people at the mall, you run into people out to eat, church, and so forth. And it wasn't necessarily from being fearful that you're impacting their life positively. What was difficult for me was the insurance requirements. So, a lot of times, again, I'd give you an example. You have this person that has a surgery, doctor writes the order, they say, hey, I want you, and the doctor doesn't know their insurance, but they'll say, okay, hey, I want you to come 3 times a week for 6 weeks. Okay, great. That's a pretty typical order, right? But then their insurance copay is 40, $50. So now every time they walk in the door, I need that money. I need that money. And a lot of people, I don't know who you are, but doing $50 3 times a week for 6 weeks, that adds up quickly. So, and then you'd see them, man, it was just a very awkward to me. It became very awkward because I live in a smaller community and I see those people frequently. And I just was not a fan of what insurance was doing in the outpatient world. And it just didn't feel it aligned with ultimately what I wanted to do, which is I understand that there are economics and there are standards of payment, but I also didn't want that to become a hardship for somebody just to come to see me. So that's really where I started to try to have those conversations with my supervisors and bosses and ownership group at the time of, is there anything that we can do to try to make this better? And unfortunately, our hands were tied, with what you could offer and opportunities trying to make that better for them.
Yeah, and that speaks to, right, the industry is the industry, and especially when you're looking anything healthcare related and insurance, the ability to impact that at like your level is very minimal, right? The impact you have is with the people, and the industry itself is going to control everything from there. So that's a tough realization, I think, for people when they get into I mean, not even just in healthcare and anything like this, but once that animal and once that beast continues to grow and you're just part of the cog in the wheel, you're just part of the machine. There are a lot of people I've talked to in my life that get discouraged, right? Hey, I came into this industry, I came into this field to make an impact, and I just don't feel like I'm able to do that with all of the wheels in the machine that's turning.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and it goes to, I think, excellent point. I think even when you reflect back early on, it's really your blind side in a lot of ways, because when you're in those 18, 19, 20-year age groups, I mean, there may be some that have more knowledge, but I was really in a lot of ways just blissfully unaware of how that worked. I just, hey, mom, dad had insurance. I'd show up to the clinic. I'd give them $20 and then the therapist would work with me. But, you don't really have that deep insight as to what goes on behind the scenes. And I remember even at that time, the 3, 4 years into being at that group, we even came up with strategies of, hey, is there a hardship waiver that we could create? And depending upon the hardship waiver, could we adjust, the expected copay? And when we started to do that, there was actually letters that were sent to the ownership group of certain insurance companies threatening to sue our institution because the contract states that the client will pay their copay, and if they pay their copay, we will then pay for the treatment. If they catch wind that you are decreasing or not having them pay the copay, then they want their money back. And I said, what kind of program are we in? And that was a long night for me with my family and conversations because again, you're in a situation to where you have physicians, you have providers, you have these people highly trained, have their credentials, have their license, have all this stuff, and they don't have the voice in the decision making of care. And that voice is, in my opinion, continuing to become less and less and out of the hands of the provider and more in control of the insurance industry. And that is a very that is very difficult when you see it. It really pulls on your strings in a lot of ways because you know that there's more that can be done for certain people, but if the insurance won't pay for it, then what do? Do you give them a bill, or it just raises a lot of very tough ethical questions.
Yeah, 100%. That does create challenges, right? Ethically and I mean professionally, right? Is this
Yeah.
really what I want to do? And you made a transition, right? And got out of that private outpatient area and working in home health now. So making that transition and really even just how you developed as a professional, as a person throughout your early career, what skills? And I'm going to get away from the technical skills as far as being a physical therapist. We'll look at more of the soft skills. What do you think you developed in that early part of career that has served you as you've progressed personally and professionally? Whether that's how you communicate with people, ways in which you structure your workday, maybe that have helped you find success and continue that success.
Yeah. So I think whenever you're thrust early on in your career into any type of administrative management supervisory role, especially in healthcare, there's a lot of just learning on your feet. You got to be okay with going with the flow for a little bit and not just getting upset at the small stuff that you can't control. So I think that was very helpful to just understand that, okay, I have some time to breathe. I have some time to figure this out. Although I think it needs to be done today, instead of sending something in half-heartedly or not very appropriately done, let's take the time needed. Let's find the time needed to get this done the right way. And I also think being in the outpatient was very, very nice for me because on top of just the PT activities and the insurance part, there's also payroll, there's also paying rent, there was also utility bills, there was also, having to find people when there was things that happened with the building we were leasing, all the things that come with being basically renting a space. The operations part of that, learning how to make those decisions within a business construct, and getting the approvals and getting things that you need, and how that worked was valuable.
It's interesting to hear about the getting into more of a management perspective within the healthcare industry and how maybe your education didn't prepare you fully for that. Now, in the classroom, I teach some management courses, and I talk to students and I say, "Hey, you all have management experience because you all manage your own lives, but how that then translates into the work world may look a little bit different." So you talked a little bit about having to work with budgets and rental agreements and payroll and people. So, what did you gain from that experience that has helped you post, that maybe first being exposed to some of that management perspective and role?
Yeah. So again, academically, didn't have the opportunity, I don't want to say the opportunity, really time. I didn't take any courses related to business. I just wasn't on the chemistry poli sci radar, nor, they kind of get into it a little bit in physical therapy school, but not in regards to, kind of what you get when you're in that outpatient clinic world. So again, I think a lot of that was really valuable from what you alluded to with learning about rental agreements and how that can impact your profitability, because obviously if you're renting something that's $20,000 a month versus a place that's $1,500 a month, your opportunity for varies dependent upon those choices. There's a lot of choices with setting that up, and then talking about your employees from, your secretaries to administrative staff to janitorial crews to your PTAs to other PTs that work for you, and kind of the pay scales that go along with that. It was a lot of just kind of, we had to learn with the flow. I was blessed to have really good ownership groups with the company that I was with. They came in monthly and we sat down and talked about things, and it was really nice to be able to see how that was all on paper. I'm a big visual guy, so seeing their graphs and their charts and things about that was really nice. And then I think the other part that allowed me to really grow with that, is it kind of allowed me to see how professionally, specifically for being a therapist, how pay models are set up. Some are pay per visit, some are pay per quota, some are just base salaries, some are salary with incentive programs, and seeing how those different pay structures are important to what you choose to do. We have some people, that may value, that love the pay per visit. Hey, if I can crush out 25 people today, and you're going to probably have a really nice paycheck, in a couple weeks, versus some people like to know what they're getting every 2 weeks, and then they can budget their livelihood, their finances and stuff at home. So it just kind of, kind of gave me that experience. And again, I think anytime you're in management, I grew up with a father that was heavily involved with management, and a lot of those ideas were ingrained in my mind without knowing they were ingrained in my mind. I would frequently find myself, oh yeah, dad used to say this, or dad, kind of that sort of stuff. But I didn't really know until you're hands on like what he was alluding to. But I think it just helps you with confidence, because to me, whenever you're a supervisor or a manager or any kind of leadership role, they feed off confidence and they can pick it up quickly. If you're not excited about what you're talking about, confident about what you're talking about, chances of them following you, it's like a general going into war, I guess. If they're not confident in who's leading them, then the outcome could be not maximized. So I think having that confidence early on, because a lot of times too, when you step into, being a young therapist, here you are 23, 24 years old, and now you're the direct manager of a 50-year-old PTA that's been working there for 20 years, and it's like, oh man, now I have to tell this person what to do, not only professionally, but also like they're kind of, not necessarily my elder, but you're in a lot of ways, you're my elder. It's a very interesting dynamic when you get into that role, because you have to wear that hat of I am your supervisor, and that took me a little bit to get used to. And when you're in healthcare, you're going to see people of all shapes, sizes, ages, genders, creeds, walks of life, and you're kind of just thrust into that world of, you're their manager, and so I think gaining that confidence, gaining that experience was beyond measure, was great for me to be able to do that, and then leading and segueing into what I'm doing now, was great.
Yeah, so you gain that experience, management, as well as just professional and the expertise through those first 5 to 10 years of your career, which translates into what you're doing now. So, what are some of the biggest benefits? You talked about some of the maybe personal benefits, but how has this kind of season of your career benefited you from all aspects, personally, professionally, and why are you in the area that you are now? What is the benefit that you provide not only to yourself but to your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, so again, right now I'm actively involved in a home health and hospice program. Primarily, we emphasize home health, which is going and providing care in their home. So them not coming to us, we go to them, and then naturally, a lot of that with home health kind of has its own certain client type or patient type, a big variety, but we, kind of a similar patient type. Again, folks that are recovering from surgery, recovering from some catastrophic injury or heart attack, stroke, whatever it might be, and then just trying to get them back on their feet, safe in their home, maximizing home function. And in that space, again, it kind of goes back to what I really wanted when did reflection early on about impacting people. I wanted to be a positive influence in their life.
So, making this transition, right, from outpatient private practice to what you're doing now, home health and with a little bit of hospice intermingled in there, how had those initial experiences prepared you for, and what have been the benefits to you professionally and personally with this transition?
So biggest key takeaways for me from going from that is early on when you are fresh out of PT school, I mean, I know everybody kind of enters at different ages, but I'd say standard would be you're somewhere 22, 25 years old. Or I don't want to say 22, you're 25, 26, 27 years old. And, now you're into a program to where, okay, you're clinic director, your manager, your supervisor, whatever your role might be. And you have some folks that are underneath of you that are 50, 60, been with the organization 20 plus years, have children your age, or that sort of stuff. And now you're the boss or their supervisor. And that could be from secretaries to PTAs to athletic trainers to a variety of support role. And that comes with its own learning curve, of how do I have the confidence in myself to be able to tell that individual, what we need to do, professionally, to get to where we're going. And I think it's all about communication. Communication is key. Have an open dialogue. Here's our expectations, mutual respect, and I think as long as you develop those early on, set those parameters, it's smooth. Thankfully, I've never had any significant professional issues in any of that capacity, but it was something that took me a little while to get used to because my first PTA was in a situation where I was like, oh man, I wonder what she thinks of me trying to tell her what to do, and she's lived her life and been successful and has a family and, all that sort of stuff. So I think that was an interesting thing to learn how to do and has carried over well with me because now where I'm at, we have a huge staff again of all shapes, sizes, and backgrounds and ages and so forth. And you're in roles where frequently you have to tell, one of those coworkers, hey, I need you to do this, or we're going to go do this. And it just all comes back to the understanding of communication. And I think the more open you are, I think that the more that things are presented initially, the less questions, less anxiety, less drama, it makes it for smooth transition. And then that builds confidence in your team, and then your team performs well. So I think that was a valuable thing for me.
Yeah, definitely. So we've kind of run through the progression of your career at this point, and kind of wrapping up. What are some key takeaways, some hints, tips, even bits of advice that you think are most relevant to people that are either in the exploration phase or entering into the workforce? What are some, we'll say, some trials and tribulations or some insights that you gained early on that have served you well throughout your career thus far?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think some things that stand out to me, kind of just on the surface when you first asked me that question, would be something that my father used to tell me, actually. And what he used to tell me was everybody needs a leader. But what he would go back on with that is, what does that mean? And sometimes being that leader is being willing to sit back and listen. Sometimes it's willing to jump in and engage and interact, figuring out where you are, who you are as a leader, recognizing your skill sets. Is it communication? Is it tech work? And where do you feel confident? And then once you feel confident, how can I utilize that in my career, in my development, in my profession that I'm going forward with? Because naturally, to me, in my exposure with clinic work, hospital work, state work, all those things that I've done, I think people, especially your higher ups or your superiors, respond well to confidence. And I think when they see that, I think it's just a skill set that can drive you in whatever career opportunity you take. And I'd also say that when you're first entering, that freshman sophomore year, don't be afraid to take off topic classes. These universities, these institutions that you're going to, these classes are there for a reason. I'd like to think that they're there for a reason because you never know what it might lead down, and it may not necessarily lead down to you becoming, an expert or getting a degree in that field, but it could network you with a professor or with somebody that has an opportunity didn't even know existed, didn't even know was there. And to me, that's what work, that's what career, that's what life is about, is networking, meeting those folks, opening your eyes to opportunities, opening doors for you. And then it's up to you to walk through that door.
Yeah, 100%. I don't know if I've ever talked about it in this podcast series, but I've talked about it with people before that the only true elective that I took in college was outside of my area. So business, I had a French minor, but I took in my last semester a hostage negotiation course,
I think I was in that
right?
class with you.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think because
Yeah.
it was something that, like, a mutual friend of all of ours was like,
Yeah,
"Hey, you
yeah, yeah.
guys should take this class," and I think it was to help boost enrollment, so the class actually happened,
Sure.
and I don't recall who all was in the class, obviously you were, but I do remember being like, "Man, this is cool just to have a class that's outside of, like, the normal that I'm hearing, outside of that type of theory," and that was in my senior
Sure.
year. It was our senior year. But you don't have to just do it in those first couple years, right? You can sprinkle something in towards the end.
A
It's a lot of fun.
100%. Sprinkling towards the end for sure. And I think too, for those that are entering the healthcare field in some capacity, whatever that is, I think a common thing that I'm finding or seeing more of, not even from just physicians to PTs to nurses to whoever, is a lot of folks are doing MBAs. A lot of folks are doing healthcare administration training. A lot of folks are using those other resources to promote themselves within even the healthcare setting. So you'd think, oh yeah, I'm a PT. Why do I need to take, business? Well, there's definitely a reason that you need to engage in something that does seem kind of left field, I suppose, on paper, but it's all intertwined. Everything's intertwined. And I would say too, when you talk about, what would be things that you recommend, I can't speak from necessarily a direct sales type career or business management, accounting. I can't give you any insight into any of that sort of stuff. But I'd like to think that a skill set that would help you wherever you're at is being able to talk face to face to somebody, to be able to sit down, have those conversations and read facial expressions, read how you react to questions. There's a lot that can be said just by how you look someone in the eyes, right? And I think something that helped me, and I'd like to think that it helped you, was theater. Getting engaged in those opportunities that if you could talk to somebody on a stage, man, you're going to be able to go into a boardroom or go into somewhere and talk to somebody. Just that confidence in yourself and your speaking. And I don't know if that necessarily means to rush and go audition for a play tomorrow, but what I'm trying to get at is do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. And if you do that thing that makes you feel uncomfortable, you will gain strengths from that.
Yeah, very much so. I reference in the classroom a lot of time to students like, hey, this was a challenge that I had. I wasn't necessarily the most comfortable speaking in front of small and or large groups, but I got involved in theater and I developed some skills as well as some coping strategies that if I
Sure.
did get nervous, like how to address that and how to if I only looked more confident and I didn't feel it, at least I was able to put that mask on for,
100%.
5 to 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Well, awesome. Yeah, this has been great. Obviously, a perspective that has not been provided yet on this podcast series. Somebody coming from healthcare, a physical therapist, working in that industry. I've been giving people the opportunity towards the end, and you've sprinkled some names in here and people that have been, we'll say, pivotal to some of your development as a person, as a professional. Are there any additional mentors or people that have helped guide you along the way that you'd like to shout out or give some kudos?
How long you want that list to be? Because we're, it's definitely, there's so many, so many people. I think, I don't know if he'll ever listen. I hope he does find your podcast, and I hope, I don't know where he's at in his world. He's since retired, but the therapist I was alluding to earlier, that really I don't think I'd be a therapist without him. His name is Mike Martin. Definitely need to give him a shout out. What he's done for our community, what he's done for our area, what he's done for the profession of physical therapy is immense. And it's somebody that I hope we get a lot of Mike Martins in this world because he's been massive for me. So that would be my shout out for sure.
All right, awesome. Well, again, thank you for taking time to chat with me today to impart some of this wisdom, give some people, a little bit to think about, right? Especially if they're early in their academic journey and their collegiate journey, setting themselves up to be flexible and have different opportunities, which is, what you did by exploring two very different and different sides of the spectrum or different points along the spectrum within those academic programs with political science and chemistry. So I appreciate it. And as always, everybody, make sure that if you aren't already, you follow all the socials, Classroom to Corner Office on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and we're on Spotify, Apple, and everywhere else you can find your podcasts. And make sure you tune in to the next episode of Classroom to Corner Office Career Talks with Chris.